Hello, welcome to another episode of GenServer. In today's episode, we shall look at how we can leverage the handle continue callback to delegate tasks within our message server. The goal is to keep our message server as simple as possible and also to try and avoid repeating code implementation. First, before I dwell into that, let's have a recap of how our message server works. So the message server is responsible for sending messages to a given phone number. Once the GenServer process has been started, you can send a send message request to the GenServer, and the send message request will let the GenServer know that it needs to send a message to the given phone number. If this message is sent successfully, we stop the GenServer from running. Otherwise, if we get a failed status, try sending the messages until we exhaust the number of max retries. To perform the retry of failed job, I made the message server to listen to the retry request after every 5 seconds. As you can see in the init callback, we have the process send after, which sends the request retry to the GenServer process after every 5 seconds. This retry request is going to be handled in the handle info callback, and in the handle info callback, if it gets the status as new, because once we are starting the GenServer process, we are sending the retry request, and at that point the status will be new because we haven't yet sent the message in order to update the status. So at this point, when we get the status as new, we're going to send another retry request to the GenServer after the 5 seconds. For this other handle info callback, we are not matching the state. So at this point, we have already sent a send message request to our GenServer process, and it has handled that request, then updated the state. In here, we are first checking if the number of retries equals to the number of max retries that is specified, and also if the status is failed. So if the number of retries and the equals to the max retries and the status is failed, we are going to stop the GenServer process from running. So this indicates that the job has been completed, and we proceed by stopping the GenServer process. Or if we get the status as done, also the job will have been completed. Otherwise, if it doesn't match any of the condition above, we are going to perform another retry to send the message, then update the status. So in here, we're updating both status and the number of retries. So the retries has been incremented by 1. Then we schedule for another retry request in 5 seconds. With this logic, you can notice that there are some repetition that have been done with the code implementation. We are calling the client send message twice in the handle info and in the handle cast. This is the repetition that I want us to avoid by taking advantage of the handle continue to delegate the task within our message server. Let's get started. So the first thing that I want us to do is to refactor how we are performing this check, and do a better refactor than adding the if else. Let's add a helper function that can help us update the state depending on the output we get by calling the send message function. Helper function, I'm going to name it as the handle send message result. This helper function is going to take 2 arguments. The first argument is the output that you get from the client send message function, and can be either an OK, or a tuple of an atom OK, or a tuple of an atom error. Let me add another function here. So let's define that. So that is okay. And we don't care about what you get in there. And the second argument is going to be the state. So this function will update the state depending on the result that we get. Our state is a struct. The status here will now be done. So for this, we are getting an error. In the second argument, we call it. So for the status, we have new. This still indicates that we haven't sent any message, and this is when the GenServer process is started. We have done to indicate that the message has been sent successfully. Then we have the failed to indicate that the message has not been sent successfully. Now here the status needs to be failed. In the handle send message, when we get an error, we need to add a condition inside here. So this condition is because we need to know at what point we need to increase the number of retries done. So if the state.status equals to new, we can only update the status to failed. Else, if the state.status is new, this is at the point where we made the first attempt and we got an error, so the status will be failed. Else, if the status is not new, that will definitely fall to fail, and also update the number of retries. So the number of retries will be incrementing by 1. This is our helper function. We have the handle send message result as the helper function. If it receives a tuple of an atom OK, we update the status to done. Otherwise, if it receives a tuple of an atom error, we first check if the status is new and update only the status to failed. Else, if it's not a new state, if the status is not new, we update the status, both the status and the number of retries. So now our intention is to delegate the task. When sending the send message request, which is going to be handled in the handle cast callback, I want us to delegate this task of sending this message to the handle continue callback. For the handle continue callback to be invoked, we need to change the return value of the handle cast. Instead of the no reply state, we need to return the no reply state and the continue. In the state, we don't have to update the status because now that task will not be performed in here. For the phone number, yes, we need to update it because the initial state does not have a phone number yet. Then after that, we need to add the continue. Continue and the message and the request that is called the send message. So this will cause the handle continue callback to be invoked. Let's go ahead and add the handle continue. So I'm going to define the handle continue callback in here. Text in the message. that is the send message as the first argument and the state as the second argument. The handle continue is the one now that will be responsible for sending the message. Cut and paste this. We have added a helper function called the handle send message result. Now instead of adding this case statement, we need to remove it. So we call that message, it takes in the phone number. The phone number is now added in the state. By the time we are calling handle continue, the phone number is in the state, so we don't have to worry about it. Then the result that we get is being expected in here. So I shall go ahead and call the handle send message result and also pass it to the state because it's responsible for updating the state. So the handle send message result returns a state. We can call this the new state. Now we have our new state. The handle continue sends a message. Then we need to know at what point to stop our GenServer process from running once the job is completed. We can only know that by checking the status in the new state. So therefore we shall go ahead and add that condition. If the new state so checking if the status here, I can do the new state in either failed or done. So if the status is failed or done, let's stop the GenServer process from running. I'm going to stop it with the normal reason. Then this is the new state. We can add a logger here just for us to know while testing that the GenServer process has been stopped. So let's job is completed. It's a simple message. Also, we can check the status of the completed job. Okay. Else, if the status is not filled or done, we need to the GenServer needs to be running until the job is completed. So therefore, this will return a no reply and the new state. Also need to schedule for another retry request for in case of a failed message, and by that we're going to call the process send after. In case something goes wrong, we shall know by trying it in the AX. The retry requests will need the handle info to be defined. We already have that in place. So in here we have told that if it gets a retry request and the status is new, schedule for another retry request and don't update the state, just return the state as it is. Otherwise, it's going to perform another retry. Currently, what we are doing is we have a check. If it doesn't match that condition, we are calling the client send message function again. So this is the repetition that we need to avoid because we already have this logic in the handle continue. Therefore, our handle info in here, it's going to delegate the task to the handle continue. So let's get rid of this. And return the no reply, the state, and add the tuple of an atom continue and send a message. If we compare what we have now and what we had before, this one looks much more simpler, and this is because we have taken advantage of the handle continue callback by delegating task to it. And this way we have also avoided calling the send message more than once in order to retry sending the messages within our server. So let's see this in action by starting the AX process. To start the AX, run the AX-smix command to first start our GenServer process. Let's start the GenServer process by calling the GenServer start function. So it needs to take in the message server module name, and we also need to specify, no, we can use the default max retries, so there's no need of passing it. So let's just start our GenServer process. It's complaining because it was expecting the second argument. I'll pass it as an empty list. When we start our GenServer process, it's going to send a retry request. So we can put listening to retry requests just to make sure that things are working as expected. State.status. The same thing is going. Okay, let's recompile this. So there's no need of recompiling. Let's just start the GenServer process again. Now we can see listening to retry request status new. So this will happen as long as the status is new. The GenServer will keep running. Next, I want to send a message to the GenServer process, and I'm going to use the GenServer cast function. Just taking the PID and the send message function, the send message request. I'm starting with a happy flow, so I'm starting with a number that I know it's not going to return an error. So process termination with reason normal, and we're getting an information the job is completed with the status done. So our logic is working. I need to start the GenServer again because the previous one has been terminated. I've started another GenServer process. Now let's send another request, but this time we're going to send a request with a number that it's returning an error. So we have that. So job is completed, status failed. So this, yes, it's returning a failed status, but it's not working as expected because the number of retries by default is 5, and we're expecting it to at least retry 5 times before terminating. So let's see where the problem is. So at this point is where I'm suspecting the problem is. So we are handling the send message result. When we get an error state, we first check if the state is new, then update the status to failed. Let's see what is happening here. So if it's new, it's going to update the status to failed. Then here we are checking if the status is in failed or done. If it's get the status as failed, it's going to stop the GenServer process from running. But what we have forgotten is to add the logic of checking the number of retries. So what we are failing to do is ensure that if the max retries has been reached and the status is failed, is when we need to stop the GenServer process from running. Therefore, we need to perform another refactor. in how we are handling the handle set message result. I'm thinking of adding another function head. This function head, if we get an error, then we can play around with the status. So therefore we can add another value for the status. So the status can be new, done. The new status indicates that the process has just been started and still it hasn't handled the sending message job, the job of sending the message. If it's done, the request has been sent to send the message, and that request was successful. If it's failed, that means the request was not successful. Then we can introduce another status to indicate error. The error status can be at the point where we just made the first attempt to send the message and the request was not successful. I think that's easier. So in here, let's pattern match. We check if the status is new. So if the status is new, this can be red. Otherwise, if it's not, we need to check if the retries, because this is the logic that we are missing, equals to state.max retries. If that's so, we update the status to failed. Else, the status can be as it is, but we keep on updating the retries. Now let's try this and see if it works. Then start the GenServer process. I'll just expand this. Let's send a message and see if the new changes. So listening to the retry request, status errored. So that is the first request. So this should happen like 5 times before it terminates. Let's do another because I want to be sure with the number of retries made. So in here we are listening to retries, that is new. Then also I can check the retries made. Retries is coming from the state that retries. Compile this. At least this way I can be sure of what is happening now. Send. Yeah, so the process is terminating after the job is completed, and here it has terminated with a failed status. That means we failed to send message to the given phone number, and also you can see it has terminated after the after exhausting the number of maximum retries. That's it for this episode. I've seen how we can take advantage of the handle continue callback to delegate tasks within the server and to avoid repetition of the code implementation.